visual. As I told you, I am here because I changed my diet. So when I saw an article that was written about Dr. Shah that said food is your medicine, I got very excited because I know what food can do because I'm still here. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. No. Dr. Irvi Shah, MD, is an assistant attending in the myeloma service at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center and assistant professor of medicine at Weill Cornell Medicine. She completed her fellowship in hematology, oncology at Montefiore Medical Center and in cancer immunotherapy at MSK and the Parker Institute for Cancer Immunology in New York. She is board certified in internal medicine, hematology, and medical oncology. Worthy of a lot of praise, but further down I read she is also a cancer survivor. Let us welcome Dr. Shah.
Thank you so much, Elise, for this invitation. I've given many talks, but the ones that I give to patients and families are the most special to me because I think, this is why we're doing this work, and it's a pleasure to be here. So I wanted to talk about, my experience and journey as a patient and how it has shaped what I research and what I do as an oncologist. And I thought I'd title it, When Life Gives You Lemons. And you probably heard of this quote and saying from, how when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. So that's where it comes from. Next. Just a few things. So I will start and I'll talk about it in 3 parts. Talk about my experience, then what research we do, and maybe some tips around what we've seen and practical tips that you could maybe incorporate if you felt like. And so things may happen when you least expect it, and I think one of the things that I learned is life is unpredictable and make the most of each day as you live because we don't know what's tomorrow. And so I was a hematology and oncology fellow at Montefiore in the Bronx, taking care of patients. I thought okay, my life is now, finished training, I'm settled into my career, and I just have to finish this, and now I'm gonna have the next job, and then I'm in my final job of what I'm gonna do. And at the end of the first year of fellowship, this was me very happy with life, everything was going well, but I started feeling more tired, and at the end of the first year of fellowship, I ended up realizing that I have some symptoms of swollen gland, and I ended up going to get some scans and realized, okay, now I'm the patient instead of taking care of patients who are cancer patients. And so this was my scan where you can see that there were some swollen glands that had shown up, and now we needed to figure out what. But you can imagine if you're a doctor, your mind goes in more places than if somebody isn't. And so I'm thinking, what's going on? But I think all of you probably have experienced this where when you have a diagnosis, people will tell you things out of concern, but sometimes too much concern can also be a problem because everybody's trying to be involved and say things that may not be appropriate. So I learned this as a patient and seeing it because as an oncologist, we don't realize this, but as a patient, you realize there are times when people might say things and you don't really want to hear those things. And so right on the first day when I'm still processing this diagnosis, I had a friend say, but I hope you can still make it to my engagement this Saturday. And I'm like, what? I'm still thinking about what's going on. And I know that this person is obviously having my best interest in their mind, and they mean well, but you hear these kind of things and then you're like, okay, people really mean well, but they don't get the perspective. And I think that perspective is very different when you are a survivor, and I think, that's important for people to understand. So this was me actually just after the surgery. So I had the surgery on Friday, and then I did end up going to that engagement party because I wanted to take my mind off it. And so you can see that the scarf I'm wearing was to cover the surgery mark because I didn't want anyone to know and ask me questions around it because you don't want to talk about it at that time. And so the next slide. And the reason I put this up is like everyone has a story. We all have stories, but sometimes when you meet someone, they might be upset with you or angry for some reason, and you're like, why are they behaving this way? But remember, you don't know what's going on behind them. And so sometimes there is a whole reason why they are this way. And so after I got the diagnosis, I realized I'm going to need 4 months of chemotherapy, but this chemotherapy is not just it's the old school kind for Hodgkin's lymphoma. You lose your hair, it's got the old side effects and everything. Even though it's very curable, it's still, you have to deal with that for a few months. So one of the first things the oncologist said, cut your hair so when you lose it, it's not going to be as dramatic, when it's shorter. So that was the haircut. And me, after the first treatment, so I got one cycle of chemotherapy, and then my friend was getting married and I was supposed to be a bridesmaid at the wedding. So I ended up going for it, but again, this was to get my mind off and continue doing things. But you can see me with the short hair in that picture because of that. And then over time, as my hair started to thin out, I again was trying to hide this from people in some ways, not because I was embarrassed, but because I didn't want to talk about it. I wasn't in the space to speak about it. And so as my hair started getting thinner, I ended up buying a wig to basically match it. But this is also an interesting thing that when you can change the slide. Now I'm wearing the wig, but people saw this and people are not observant. That's another thing you should know. It's like you think that people would notice, and I thought everybody would be like, okay, why are you wearing a wig? And I got people telling me, oh, that's a great haircut, what happened? And I'm like thinking, how did I get more hair? And you don't even notice that. It's like a thing. So while inside I'm cringing and shocked, you're actually, I had to give a big smile and go yeah, it's great, thank you for this compliment. And so sometimes, you really don't know what's the backstory in these things. Then the next slide. And this was me basically after my hair started growing back a year into, after my treatment. And so when I really didn't enjoy wearing the wig, and I was going back to India to see my family and a friend's wedding. So I decided, okay, this is the time I'm going to take the wig off and now not go back to my own short hair. So when I did that, and I had to go to an Indian wedding, and as all of you might know, you know how Indian families are and other things. They expect women to have long, nice, pretty hair and things like that. So they see me with the short hair and go why did you cut your hair so short? And I'm thinking, yeah, no, this is the style, what do you tell them? So that was me for that time. And next slide. So I think another lesson that I learned is, when you decide you want to do something, people are going to always be there to tell you, no, don't do that or do something else. And you have to decide it's your story and you drive it. So what happened is while I was going through treatment, because I was in fellowship, my program director and senior faculty thought, okay, she needs to focus on her treatment. She should not be doing any medical work or research or anything like that. But I know my personality. I would go crazy thinking about the diagnosis all the time and being at home. So I needed to do something to take my mind off. So but they would not have this conversation directly with me. They were thinking in their best interest. They would try to block it indirectly and say okay, no, we're going to protect her from it. So while they thought it was in my best interest, it really wasn't. So what I ended up having to do is go talk to other people and find another doctor who was ready to mentor me, even though someone else said no. So I ended up finding somebody like that, and it really worked out well. So you can, I finished treatment in 2016, I think it was August or September, and during that time I was seeing patients once a week in clinic and then doing some research on the side. And so I ended up in that December going to the American Society of Hematology meeting and presenting the work that I did during that summer. So it was a good experience, and then we published the paper 2 years later. So this ended up being the start of my research career. From something that was adversity came something that I realized my passion or interest in something. Can change this. So changing what, sometimes the hardest place we are in, or our crisis, is really where we sometimes find what our true meaning is, or things in that place. And so for me, I think you might have all experienced this as well, that when you have a diagnosis, people will tell you, oh, you should eat this, and you should do that, and take this supplement, and do that. So I had friends and family trying to tell me what to eat and what to do. And I was thinking, I'm an oncologist, so I should really know this, right? But I really didn't, because as doctors, we don't get training much in nutrition, and I didn't know the data behind what's there for cancer, risk factors, and things like that. So I'm thinking, okay, I really need to now, think about this myself, and I should know it. So it became a side hobby for me, where I would read up about research around this topic, but I never really thought, how am I going to make this into a career? So I continue to study genetics, immunotherapy, all different kinds of aspects of cancer treatment, but not really focus on nutrition as a research career. But then when I started as faculty at Memorial Sloan Kettering in 2019, I said to my boss at that time, I really want to do a study looking at a dietary intervention and see what happens. Are you okay with that? And he's like, sure, go ahead. And I thought that would be one side project, and I would continue to do the other research I was doing. And so the next slide. And so with that research, and I'll show you some of the data and what we did with that, but that study went from one study to the next, and now we have 4 studies open in that space, and many more to come, and we built a whole program around it. So I've termed it like nutrivention research at MSK, and we study nutrition, the microbiome, and metabolism, mainly in myeloma, because that's the cancer I'm focused on as faculty, but we are expanding into other areas as well. Myeloma is a type of blood cancer. You can, next slide. And so I just wanted to show you a little bit of data around genetics, because whenever somebody gets cancer, we always focus on, is it the genes, or I had bad genes? And even oncologists will tell you, like, okay, we have to look at the tumor and look at the genes and think about like what's going on there. But when I started reading about it, I realized, yes, there is a part that is genes, and yes, we don't want to minimize that and focus on it, but there is also a part around lifestyle changes that could help us, whether to reduce the risk or to even reduce the risk of recurrence in the future, or even go through treatment better. And so this is a really nice study. I know the slide is small, but the punchline of the study is that they looked at calculating a healthy lifestyle score for people, and then they calculated a genetic risk score. And they showed that people who had bad genes and a healthy lifestyle had similar risk to somebody who had an intermediate genetic risk. So somebody with bad genes could do similar to someone with better genes just because their lifestyle was good. And so it just shows you that the risk of cancer can change based on what we do, and we don't have to just put it all towards fate, or, okay, this is, in our DNA, so there's nothing. And I know the mayor of New York likes to say, it's not in your DNA, it's in your dinner, just as a joke, but, that is partly true, I think, in some ways. So the next slide. So this is an example, like just for you to get a glimpse of like what we do as an oncologist. This is a patient, that I see in clinic, and I see many like this, where they have so many medical problems when they come to see me. You can see the page is full, you don't need to read it, but you can see that they have so many issues going on. And on top of this, now they have cancer. So if I, as an oncologist, need to treat someone like this, can you imagine how complicated it is with all the medications and the interactions of the drugs? So what I say to patients is, like, if you are in your best health and the least number of medications you need, even if you do end up getting cancer, you can get the best treatments possible because you're fit enough to get it. So this patient, because of all these medical issues, you can click next, was not able to get like many of the latest therapies, and so obviously lived a shorter life because of that. And the things that I marked in green are things that I believe would have been avoided or could have with a change in their lifestyle. So next slide. So what about dietary patterns and risk of cancer? I'm just showing you 3 large population studies, but there are numerous like this. And what we call these are epidemiological population studies, where what happens is we look at a whole population of thousands of people, and then we say who gets cancer, and we survey these patients before they get cancer and say, what is your dietary pattern? What do you eat? And then we look at who gets cancer, and then we try to understand what are risk factors. So in these 3 studies, one from the UK, one from USA, and one from France, showed very similar findings. They studied it in different ways, different countries, but they all showed that eating more plant-rich foods leads to about a 15 to 20% less incidence of cancer. And each of these studies had about 50 to 70,000 participants in the study to understand this. So what I realized from this is like there is some evidence around dietary patterns and the risk of cancer. It's just something that we don't talk about as much. So next slide. This is again another paper we published looking at what are the mechanisms. So if you ask me and you say like, why does diet reduce the risk of cancer and what could it be? And I can tell you there are many different ways, and some of the ways, just to explain it, would be that you might have heard of insulin resistance. So insulin resistance, once that develops, insulin can drive tumor growth. So people who have more insulin resistance are more likely to get cancer. And insulin resistance is a state of like diabetes or pre-diabetes, or sometimes you may not know it's there, but it's there in a poor dietary state. Other things, plant foods are rich in chemicals called phytochemicals or plant nutrients, and they have anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory properties. So when we eat them, we're really adding those anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer foods. Other things are the microbiome. Have you all heard of the microbiome? I thought I'll give you a 2-minute understanding of what the microbiome is and why you should care for it. Maybe after this, you'll start feeding your microbiome instead of yourself. So we can go to the next slide. So what is the microbiome? You must have heard this buzzword a lot, and maybe after this you can quiz your friends and know what it means. But we are actually more microbiome than human cells. Did you know that? So if we had to count the number of cells in each of us, we are more microbiome cells than human. Human would be about 30 trillion cells. Microbiome would be 38 trillion cells. So just to get the perspective there, it's just that the microbiome cells are smaller, so we don't see them, and the human cells are larger, so you see yourself as that. But actually, you're more microbiome than human, so very important to think about what they want for food. Next. And there are a lot of papers, and we're just scratching the surface of the microbiome at this time, but there's going to be more and more research coming out around this, how the microbiome affects the risk of cancer, and not just cancer, but health and disease and inflammation and other things. So you really want a healthy microbiome if you want an overall healthy lifestyle. Next slide. And then when we think about the microbiome is what affects your immune system. You want a healthy immune system, in the state of the COVID risk, infection risk, cancer risk, all of these things. Can everyone still hear me? Okay. So there are some things that are non-modifiable factors, so things you really can't do anything about: where you live, how old you are, what your genetics are, what infections you've had, things like that. So there are things we really can't do anything about if we want to boost our immune system, but there are things that we can, and these are the modifiable factors. So my research focuses on things that we can do something about and empower ourselves for, and things like nutrition, obesity, diabetes, physical activity, sleep, stress, all of these things affect the immune system. And that's why it's important that we, look into it. Next. And one concept, if we had to learn one thing about the microbiome today, it is diversity. Think about, the rainforest, or what's good or healthy about a rainforest. It's because there are different species of birds, animals, plants, all of those different things, and all of them live together in an ecosystem, and that's what creates the health of that planet or the earth, right? But once we take diversity out and we make it all uniform, that's no longer healthy. So if you have only palm trees or you have only coconut trees, that's not great. You want the diversity, and that's why the rainforest does well. The same thing in our microbiome. You want the variety of bacteria. If you have a microbiome that has few bacteria, not great, because that's not diverse enough. And time and again, every month I see papers come out, more diversity, longer lifespan after cancer, like overall survival, progression-free survival. More diversity, better lifespan. And so this is one concept, but how do we improve our diversity? And that's something we'll talk about. Next slide. So higher diversity is associated, like I said, with better survival in cancer. And this is just 2 studies, one of them that, things that we've done at MSK, and just showing you. Next slide. What about COVID, or infection risk? I'm going to show you COVID because a lot of papers around that have been published, but this is a study looking at dietary patterns and risk of COVID. And what they did show is that people who had more plant-based dietary patterns, meaning foods higher in vegetables, beans, legumes, and fruits and nuts, and lower in poultry, red meat, and processed meat, had 73% lower odds of moderate to severe COVID, 73%. And this is this is one study I'm showing you, but there are more. In the interest of time, I'm of course not showing you more. But we can do some of these things to reduce our risk, and this is one of them too. Next. So I'll now talk about the third part, like some of the research that I've done. I showed you some evidence that's available, but now I'll just show you some of the studies we've done and how we're trying to study this further. So myeloma is a blood cancer. But there are some precursor states in the blood called precancerous states that we call MGUS and smoldering myeloma. But patients who have these disorders are very anxious because they're like, what, you tell me I have precancerous state, but you're going to just observe and not really treat me because our standard of care for this precancer is doing nothing. So we just watch and wait till some people develop cancer and some may not. So we decided that's a good population to really study what's the effect of the diet or the nutrition and lifestyle on helping these patients. Next slide. So we were trying to tilt the scale from the risk of myeloma, from an increased risk based on lifestyle factors, can we tilt the scale and reduce the risk? And so you can, next slide. So this was the Nutrivention trial, just 20 patients. It was an early study, but we actually shipped patients lunch and dinner for 3 months, and we provided them coaching for 6 months. We followed them for a year and saw what happened. We included patients who had this precancerous state and who also had an elevated BMI, because we do know that if a patient had an elevated body mass index or overweight or obese, they were twice as likely to progress this. We know this data, so we were trying to see, can we change this for patients? Next slide. We were able to improve their adherence. So before they went on the study, they were eating only like 20% of their food, which was healthy, like unprocessed plant food. And then on the study, it improved to 90%. And the same thing with the fiber intake, that went up really significantly too. It's important, to get your fiber because the microbiome needs the fiber. That's where it gets its food from. Next slide. So we looked at quality of life. You would think like, okay, I'm telling patients to change their diet. Is their quality of life getting worse? Are they feeling like, okay, I can't enjoy what I want to eat? But surprisingly, quality of life gets better. They had less fatigue, less shortness of breath, overall felt better. And we measured this with a survey, and you can see that it actually improved. It's just the first month, when somebody's making these changes, it can be hard because you're used to something different. But then once you get over that period, then once it sustains, it becomes a lifestyle change. Next slide. So what we did see is that patients, within just the 3 months of giving them these foods, they had a reduction in their weight of about 8 to 9% of their body mass just in 3 months. And we did not have any calorie restriction or anything. They were eating to fullness, but we were just giving them very high fiber-rich foods, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, seeds, nuts, things like that, and cooked meals, but just focusing on these foods. And you can also see in this figure here is that the diversity that I talked to you about improved significantly in the microbiome. And this figure shows you that their cancer was progressing slowly, but it slowed down in these two patients. So we actually started to see the effect of the diet too already in a year or two. Next slide. This is actually one of the patients. So this is with permission. This was before, and that's his quote. He says, "It looked pretty dark back in 2010. Thanks to this trial, I'm into the light." So this was before the intervention, and you can click. And this is him after. So again, it's just a lifestyle change, getting used to it, but now he feels like he has more energy, his kidney disease has slowed down in progression, the cancer risk progression slowed down, he feels so much better. He's like, "I've never been this weight since my 20s, and he's in his 70s now. So you can't even tell that from the picture, but you know, he's late 70s. And so it's never too late to make a change, you know, if you want to. We've had some patients, the oldest on our studies are in their 80s, and they've also done this. So it's not like, okay, you know, I'm too old that I don't want to make a change anymore. Next slide. We also surveyed them, and we said, you know, we wanted a true feedback, and we're like, really, did you like this, or would you do this again? So we asked patients, would you do this again? And 100% of them said, yes, we'd do it again. So, you know, patients liked it. And we also saw that some patients came off their medications. That patient you saw there, he was on insulin for 30 years before he went on the study. And within 1 month on the study, he was off insulin. It's 2 years since he's been on the study, and he's not taken insulin since. And that in itself, forget all of it, like, okay, the injections and everything, but it's also a cost saving. He said he's saving about $100 a month now because he doesn't have to, you know, pay for the insulin. So it's not just about, okay, yes, you don't have to do the injections anymore, you feel better, all of that, but you also then reduce your cost as well. Another patient came off antidepressants on the study. Another one came off cholesterol medications. We had a drop in cholesterol of 30 points. Just with diet alone, they could change their LDL cholesterol by an average of 30 points down, reduction. So, you know, diet does make a difference where you could, you know, do some of these changes, and you don't need to be on a statin if you're able to make the changes. Many people end up on these medications, right? Next. So we talked, next. And this was just a quote from a patient. "I was able to attain a healthy weight and have maintained the weight since starting the meals. I feel good, I have energy and no bloating." Next. So this is just a website, the World Cancer Research Fund. If you've not heard of them, or the American Institute of Cancer Research, they talk about foods to eat for increased risk, increased risk or decreased risk of foods to avoid and foods to eat. And these are 10 guidelines that they have on cancer prevention recommendations. And what's interesting, 6 out of the 10 are on nutrition and diet. So this really can play a role in our lives. And the 6 out of the 10 really focus on eating a diet rich in whole grains, fruits and vegetables, limiting consumption of sugary drinks and processed and red meat, and alcohol as well, limiting. I know. It used to be that there was a safe limit, but now the new guidelines say there's no safe limit. But I think it's a risk benefit in everything, right? Next slide. So this is trivia time, and maybe somebody's brave enough to answer these questions for me. So how much do Americans eat on average, and how much should Americans eat on average? And then we'll talk about different food groups and see what you think. So what about added sugar? Anybody feel like taking a guess? How many teaspoons of sugar do Americans eat on average? 10? Someone said 10. Anybody more than 10? Less than 10? 5? 12? 12? Anyone else? We have the highest is 12, the lowest is 5. Anybody think higher than 12? How many teaspoons of sugar do Americans eat on average? On average, per day. 30? Okay, you can click one time. It's 17 teaspoons a day. That's pretty high. And this is average, okay? So average means where 50% of the Americans lie. So if you can imagine, there are going to be many who are way above average at the 30 teaspoons. how much should Americans eat? What do you think about that? What's the guidelines? What's the recommendation for sugar? 10? What? Yeah, we'll talk about it. One, so ideally, meaning obviously, we would want to go as low as 1, but I think the risk in terms of what they say is, you can click, is about six for females and 9 for males. So there's a lot of hidden sugar in things that you don't even realize there is, like cereals or fast food or things like that. So when you look at the labels, you'll see this. And you can see that one can of a sugary drink like Coke has about 10 teaspoons of sugar in it. So just one can alone exceeds the recommended daily allowance. Next question, what about dietary fiber? So I told you that dietary fiber is very important to feed the microbiome, right? Like we want to feed the microbiome, very important. So how much do Americans eat of dietary fiber on average? Not much, that's right. But how much? Maybe, in this would be in grams. So you can click 1. It's about 10 to 15 grams. That's average, but many of them are way below 10 to 15 grams. And how much should Americans eat? What do you think? What's the recommended requirement in grams? 25? That's a good answer. It's about 25 to 38. You can click. So 25 for females and 38 for males. So we eat pretty much half the amount of fiber that we should be as in our diets. And a very simple thing, if all of you just ate 1 cup of cooked beans a day, you'd increase your fiber by 15 grams. 1 cup of beans has 15 grams of fiber. So you can very easily go from the average of 10 and you just add 1 cup of beans and you've got into the fiber requirement. So and not to minimize that this does have a benefit in the long term too, those beans. So what about salt? Any guesses?
Oh God.
Yeah. So this would also be in teaspoons. You can click 3,400 milligrams or 3.4 grams of salt is the average that people eat. And what should Americans eat is actually about 2 grams, so 2.4. You can click less than 2 grams. So we're already eating more salt than we need to, more sugar, less fiber. And the top sources of salt do come from processed food. So like pizzas, they're going to be one of your top sources, and other fast food. But one of the hidden sources that people don't often think about and is 8th on the list is actually poultry, because a lot of poultry in supermarkets is injected with saline to make it look plumper and look better. So you're ending up, even though you think the poultry might be the healthier meat, it's often got a lot of sodium in it. What about fruits and vegetables? It's the same thing here. Anybody want to guess, or should I just show you the results? Show the results. Okay, so 0.9 cups is what on average Americans eat, and what they should is 1.5 to 2 cups. So it's pretty much half. Same thing with vegetables. You can click. It's 1.4 cups, and click. It's 2.5 or 3.5. So Americans are eating literally half of what we should. And with protein, what do you think? Are we eating less protein or more protein than we need to? More? I hear more, and then how many say more? Put your hands up. And how many say less? Seems like we have even split. Less? You can show the results. So on average, Americans eat 80 to 100 grams per day. And how much should they eat? It's about 48 to 72 is what's needed. So we eat almost double the protein we need, and still everybody's focused on protein because they think that that's the most healthy food. Not that I'm saying you shouldn't eat the protein, but you can get enough protein from things like beans as well, and you need to get the fiber. So that's what you really need to focus on, because that's what we're not getting enough of. Next slide. So this is just one thing. We're almost done, but the fiber gap is something that I wanted to bring up. So I talked to this concept of fiber, right? Like why it's important. So if I ask all of you in the room and I say, How many of you think you're getting enough fiber in your diet? What do you think? If people want to put their hands up, do you think you're getting enough fiber? I think about 60 to 70% might say yes, we're getting enough. But in reality, how many are actually getting enough is less than 5%. You can click. So people think that they get enough fiber, but actually the majority of people do not. Next slide. And fiber is important for the microbiome and just helps with keeping the lining and all of that. And then another concept is how many different plant foods do you eat in a week? And the reason I say this is, you can click next, is that this was a study where they looked at stool samples, because the microbiome is, that's how you look at it, with over 10,000 people, and they said who has more diversity in their stool, and they saw that those who eat more than 30 types of plant foods per week had the highest diversity. When I talk about 30 types of plant foods, I'm not talking about eating broccoli 30 times, but I'm talking about broccoli, beans, nuts, grains, other things. So each food that you eat is a different one. So if you eat red bean and a chickpea, those are counted as two. So 30 different plant foods. So try to bring that variety in, because each food you eat is feeding different microbiome bugs, and you want that variety, like I said. So the more variety of foods you eat, the more you're going to feed the variety there. Next slide. So what I'm talking about with this is that, we want to make sure we are getting enough plant foods. And when I say all of this, people assume that I'm telling everyone to be vegan. But I want you to understand the concept of is that a vegan is often driven by ethical reasons or environmental reasons or things like that. But you could eat Oreos and French fries and be vegan too. Now that is not healthy. But the same thing with vegetarian. So when some people assume that it would be vegetarian, but you could eat only dairy and you could only eat eggs and you could still be vegetarian and get zero fiber in your diet, right? But what you can click next. And what I'm talking about is getting that high fiber and mostly plants in your diet. And with that comes eating more of these unprocessed or minimally processed foods. And this is how the plate should look. About a half of the plate should be fruits and vegetables, a quarter of it whole grains, and a quarter of it mostly plant proteins. And maybe if there is meat, it's a small amount. Next slide. So you can just keep clicking. So it could be whole food, plant-based, vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian, Mediterranean. It doesn't matter what you call it. It's where you're getting most of your unprocessed plant food calories from. Next. So I just encourage you all, as I finish talking, is that maybe you pick one goal for tonight, and I will feel like I've achieved something with this talk. Is maybe you pick one goal that you want to work on and discuss it with your, the partner next to you, and think about what you want to do. But these are some things that could really help, and once you do one of them, then you can move on to the next, or think about it and how you make small changes that can over time lead to big differences. So some of the goals that I put here, maybe thinking about eating 1 cup of beans a day, or maybe 2 cups of fruit a day, or 1 serving of fermented food, 4 cups of vegetables, 1/3 cup of nuts and seeds, reducing your sugar to less than 6 teaspoons or no sugary drinks at all, salt, reducing it, eating that variety, more than 30 plant foods, or 1.5 cups of whole grains, and then more than 75% of your plate being these fiber-rich foods. Next slide. So just to conclude, I think it's important that we change our focus in cancer just from living longer to living better and longer. Next. By incorporating lifestyle, better nutrition, fitness, all of these things, there is an inertia. It's hard to do it in the first month because you're so used to what you're doing before that. But once you get over that 1 month and you get into the groove of it, it becomes your second nature, and then it gets much easier. And so with that, this is going to be your celebration of life dinner and dance for that too.
We want to thank Dr. Shah. One more round of applause. Hopefully tonight everyone will change their eating habits starting tomorrow, because you didn't do it tonight, clearly. The sugary drinks at the bar, clearly. So we'll start tomorrow. But they gave us fruits for dessert. So we're on a road of recovery here, people. We're going to do it right. All right? So again, another round of applause for Dr. Shah. Andrew's going to go around and give out some hats. Woo-hoo!
Come on out, survivors. All right, here we go. Here we go. Round of applause for our survivors. I don't hear you. I don't hear you. Let's go. Round of applause for our survivors. Our celebrators of life. Round of applause for our survivors.
Wishing you the best, pray that you are blessed. No success, no stress, and lots of happiness. I'm better than that. I'm not gonna blast you on the radio. I'm better than that. I'm not
All right, we'd like to introduce all of our survivors to all of our guests. So when I come up to you, please share your name and how many years you are a survivor. Here we go.
One year.
1 year, here we go. Grace, 12 years. Rosemary, 6 months. 12 years. Thomas, here we go. Kurt Douglas, 5 years.
19 years.
14 years.
Emmanuel, 3 years.
Very nice.
4 years. 7 years.
This is my wife, by the way.
Hi, I'm Stephanie.
18 years.
Angela Boyd, 2 years. Gail, 13 years.
14.
30 years.
30 years. 30. years. Where's Dr. Busby? Dr. Elise, where are you? And we've got a special guest right over here. Julia, 10 years. Congratulations, everybody.
Jeanette Santana, I'm a twice survivor. The first time is 18 years, the second time 15 years.
Senor? And your name is George? 11 years? 11 years. Very nice. Oh, Dr. Shaw, where are you? Doctor, come on up here, doctor. Come on up. That's a quick photo. How many years survived, doctor? 6 years. 6 going on 7. Very nice. Now, one more round of applause for all of our survivors. And let's give a special round of applause to our chairperson, Dr. Elise Busby. How many years survived, madam? 23 years. One more round of applause for all our survivors, everyone.
Can Jose stand, please? He's over in the corner, but he cannot walk up here to the circle.
Jose?
Can you stand, please?
Give Jose a
10 years of
Give Jose a
10 years of cancer. Okay, thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Shah. You notice I brought out my vegetables and fruits contributed from this catering service. They voluntarily are going to share fruits for dessert. So they are cooperating with Dr. Shah with her recommendations. Thank you all for coming tonight. We really appreciate it. Let's